All right. I think people are still trickling in, so we'll just talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. You are at the ELA Writing. Some of you are here because you are new to MCAS-Alt and you need to know the ELA Writing. And some of you may be here just for a refresher. Perhaps things didn't go as well as you thought they would last year when you submitted your portfolio. So this is for the 2023 Alt. I'm here with Aaron Clark and Kevin Froten. They are our contractor. They're with Cognia. And I'm also here with our teacher consultants, Laura Hines, Diane Costello, Sheila Chamberlain, and I believe Patty Sprano will be here before the end of the meeting. I'm going to ask you to hold your questions. We'll have a couple of different times for questions. So just hold your questions until we get there, all right? I'm sure we'll get them answered. The first thing we think about when we look at this is writing. You want my student to write? Well, let me tell you that ELA writing is not about the physical holding of the writing instrument, but actually expressive communication. And we can do that in so many different ways. We can talk about sharing experiences, a student's opinion or preference. We can look at ideas or facts. We can discuss different books or articles. We can look at stories and talk about those or videos. Poetry and imagery, our students just love that imagery, and sharing knowledge with someone else. It's always, I don't know about your students, but our students, when they came in on a Monday, we're always excited to tell you about their weekend. We didn't ask them to write, and so you get a lot more information when they wanted to tell you something. But what ELA writing does not assess is their ability to hold that writing instrument. Definitely not copy letters. Please don't give them letters and then highlight them and make them copy over them. That is not what this is about. Leave tracing letters and words to the OT. This is when you want to engage your SLP. Okay, important information. Oops, sorry. So in order to express themselves, obviously, your student has to have a primary mode of communication. So here's a list of different communication skills, and I want you to take a poll and let me know how your student communicates. So just take a moment on this beautiful Friday morning and let us know how your student communicates. And we'll share this poll when everyone gets finished so you can see as well. Oh, thank you. Many of you are participating. That's awesome. There's about 288 of you, just in case you're interested. That's quite a bit. Oh, no. Yes, 288. All right. Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to take a look at this. You can see that 75% of you have students that use oral language. 33% can actually write. Only a small number, which is what I would expect, are using sounds. We have symbols, 45%, objects and gestures, about 50%, and about 16% using sign language. So that's a decent mix, but you can see that still oral language can be used if your student is able to speak. You can write verbatim what they are saying. One thing we didn't ask about was using a high-tech device, such as a Dynavox or the iPad with Proloquo to Go on it, or a low-tech communication system. Those obviously are other ways in which you could have your student communicate. The other thing is in the chat, Erin has put where the materials can be found. This is being recorded, but it's going to take a while to be posted. We have to get it edited. We have to send it out for professional closed captioning, and then we can get it posted. So that takes at least 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks. However, the PowerPoint and the samples are all available at that website that is in the chat for you. If your student does not have a way to communicate, please reach out to your SLP and get that whole process moving, because there's no way you can assess communication if your student has no means of communication. It's very important for them to have it. So this is a great way for you to advocate and say, look, the state wants us to assess it. How am I supposed to assess it? So let's work and advocate for our students. Here's the requirements. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to complete a skill survey. And if you've been at any of our trainings, I have said that every single time. You need a skill survey for every strand you submit. So you're going to fill out every line on the skill survey, which we'll take a look at in a moment. But you have to have one. So you don't have to print it out until you're ready to put it into the binder, but you should do it before you ever start your baseline. You want a baseline of what your student can do. It's the first attempt, so it should be dated prior to the final samples. It might be in conjunction with a final sample, that's fine, but you only need one baseline. This can be a brainstorming activity, an outline. You just want to see what they are capable of doing and then what you need to work on. And this is the only time I will say this. You have time to work on this. So this doesn't have to be done in, don't grab the first 3 pieces to put in the binder in November. Like, take your time, let the students progress, help them to learn how to express themselves in a way that they are understood, that they can add colorful language. Like, just make sure that you take your time with this. And then you're going to give us 3 different final writing samples. They'll be on different topics or pictures, but they won't be all exactly the same. Then you're going to fill out the state provided rubric. So you're going to pre-score them based on each of those final writing samples. And then on those final writing samples, you're going to have the student's name, a valid date, the percentage of independence, only independence, because the rubric, that state provided rubric, is going to be your accuracy. Final samples for students using Access Skill will include a written product that's produced by either teachers or the teacher or the peers, and it's going to be noting the student participation. And as advertised, when I am finished and after Kevin shows us the writing program and how to find the various pieces of this that we need, Laura Hines is going to address Access Skill in depth. So hold on for that. So here's the ELA writing skills. There's 9 lines. And remember, the other day, Kevin said, you must do each line, because if you don't, then you can't get into the strand. So look carefully, make sure you've filled this out completely. This should help you determine between this and then the baseline, you'll know what your student needs to work on. And of course, we're not going to do anything. Oops, that got over a little bit too much. You shouldn't have anything in the D or E column. You would just want to look for skills in the A, B, or C column. So this is just a visual of the required elements. So the first thing you're going to have, which isn't here, would be a strand cover sheet, then your skill survey, then a work description for the baseline, and then the baseline writing sample. And remember, you don't have to score that. That's that's not necessary. We're not asking for it. You can score it for yourself if you want to see how they do, or have the students work with you to see what they need to work on. Then you're going to give us 3 work sample descriptions, and these are going to go with each of those final writing samples, along with those 3 final distinct writing samples, and then those pre-scored rubrics. What's very important is that whatever date you do the final writing sample on, both the work description label and the pre-scored rubric should have the same date. It makes it so much easier for scoring. It's very difficult to try to figure out which one belongs to which. And if we can't figure it out, we can't score it. So please make sure you date those accordingly. When you go to choose a what text type you want, so your 3 final writing samples can be any combination of text types. We have argument or opinion, informative explanatory, or narrative, which now includes poetry. So in argument opinion, it's whether it's stating a claim, but a lot of our students would be more about the preference. All of these text types are based on a text or a topic. In informational text, sometimes you're just conveying facts. And in narrative, it's about a story, whether it's real or imagined. And you know how our kids love to tell stories or retell a story. It can be any of those things. And then they can use poetry, and that uses figurative language, and that can express an emotion or tell a story. However, this is a highlightable moment. When you look at the actual resource guide, there are many skills in there. You are not going to choose those skills. There is only one measurable outcome that you can choose for each of these text types. And the only thing that changes is whether it's a narrative, an informative, or argument text type. That's the only thing that changes. So the example would be, student will use his or her primary mode of communication to express or create a writing sample that is a narrative. That is your only choice, and we've made it very broad so that you can work on any of those skills that are in there. And if you take a look at the skills that are in the resource guide, it might help you to determine what you want to work on for the students' writing. You can do any combination, as I said. Some people think they're doing something wrong because if you start with a argument opinion and then you change to a narrative, you have to do a new strand cover sheet. It's just the way the program works. It's perfectly fine. So you could do all narratives, or you could do one of each of these text types. That is your decision. And again, this is the only time I'm going to say that you have a little time to work on this. Don't rush it. So let's look at what the baseline could be. Here's some examples of some graphic organizers. And again, these do not have to be pre-scored. These are just for you. And I'm sure you have other examples of graphic organizers that you might want to use. Because during those final writing samples, they're going to be standardized, and we'll look at those in a second. And this is what the rubric includes. So it's going to be the level of complexity, which just means, is it access skills or entry points? And if you went to Laura's access skills yesterday, you should have a better understanding as to whether or not your student is access skill or entry points. Here's where the accuracy is being computed. Demonstration of skills and concepts. There are 4 rubric areas: expressions of ideas and content, use of vocabulary, text structure, and knowledge of conventions. Those 4 is what we calculate for the accuracy. We only ask for independence, and that's the frequency of prompts. Depending on how verbose your student is, it can be by the word or by the sentence. And some people are confused, like how do I know if I've prompted them? If you say you're going on a fall trip and the students get to choose a pumpkin. So when you get back to the class, you're going to write a class story about your field trip. And one student puts on the paper, got pumpkin. So you look at that and you say to them, what kind of pumpkin? Was it big? Was it small? Was it white? Was it orange? That is a prompt if they answer and write it down, because you're giving them more information. You're helping them to get more information on that paper than they would have. So you're prompting them to add more information. Eventually, if as you go along, they'll understand how to add more. And perhaps you have a way, like one of those organizers that adds, what's my descriptor word? How do I add more using picture icons? So whatever your student needs, if you are helping them get more information on the paper, that's a prompt. And then self-evaluation. This is separate from the actual pre-scored rubric, but you want to include it on the work description or as a separate page, just like any of the other self-evaluations. And if you use something like a self-correcting, like editing page where students can check off, did I use capital letters? Did I use descriptive words? They check that off. That's a wonderful self-evaluation. Or perhaps they go back and edit it themselves. Any of those are good self-evaluations. So here's the rubric, and you'll see at the top, it's highlighted. I hope you can see that. 2 at the very top where it says level of complexity, or 3, student addressed writing through entry point. So you'll choose one of those. And then on the side where it's highlighted, those are the demonstration of skills. And then so you can see to the right of that, there are 4 categories. So you want to make sure when you're looking at that student's final writing sample that each of these have been completed before you move to a higher number. Like you wouldn't give them a 4 if they haven't have everything in the 3. So be sure to check. Starting in this case, you're going to start at the 1 and keep looking as you go up to a 4 and see where your student is. I think that one of the easier ones to look at is text structure. So you would only give a 4 to text structure if you had a paragraph of at least 3 related and well-constructed sentences to express ideas. So you know what that would look like. And so if your student is not creating something like that, they shouldn't have a 4. And then down below, you see the independence, and Kevin will show you how that works in the actual program when we get done. We just talked about reviewing the criteria. Students on access skills will get demonstration of skills score of 1. But if you think that you want to use like a fill in the blank worksheet and the student is just using words or pictures, that's going to also create a 1. So you want to think about how you can get a higher score for a student that is not working at access skill level. Fill in the blank worksheet isn't really a good way for a student to express themselves. It may be at the beginning, and then you can fade out all of the words that they need at the beginning and help them to figure out what words would help them. So instead of my favorite color is, perhaps you can have a topic of favorite things, and then they start to learn how to add more words. But again, that takes time. You want the percent of independence, and we talked about that, the number of prompts relative to the total number of words or sentences. And that's going to be strictly based on how what your student produces. And definitely the score must be based on the contribution of the student, not how you helped or how the paraprofessional edited it and then they rewrote it. This is based on the contribution of the student. And the scorer's job is to verify that the teacher's score reflects the evidence. So whatever you send us, whatever you submit, is in agreement with your scores. And so we will not change it unless it doesn't reflect the evidence. That would be something like 2 words and you gave it a 4. Then it would be changed. If that's clear. Hopefully that's clear. So here's one I'd like you to take a look at, and you might want to take a minute, to download the sample, because I want you to look at this final writing sample, pardon me, and see how you would score it. So the writing description says that Lacey completed an opinion writing sample about what being healthy meant to her. She completed the sample verbally, and the teacher scribed, excuse me one moment. Okay, I think that's better. And scribing is perfectly acceptable as long as you do it verbatim and let us know that you are scribing. And she stated her opinion with details to explain why. So when we look at what Lacey said, it said, healthy is drink water. I choose healthy foods. I like apples. I like masks, brush hair. So she was 81% independent. So how would you score this? Don't worry about the independence. Looking at the actual rubric, how would you score it? We're going to put up a poll and see what you think. Oops. I think I'm going to go back to the rubric so that you can see the rubric. There you go. So look carefully. Would this student be doing it at access skill level or entry points? Is the student able to make cognitive choices, express themselves? We definitely have to add Jeopardy music into these polls. Thank you for your patience. Okay, I think we are slowing down. And you can obviously download it and have this PowerPoint and do it yourself when you're after and see what you think of as opposed to being put on the spot here. But nobody knows what your answer is except you. So um, as soon as we're done, we'll share it and then we'll go through it with you. Yes, I think we can end it now. I think it's fine. So here's the results. I just want to be clear, access skill is 2, entry points is 3. Remember that this was scribed. The student spoke, the teacher scribed. This is definitely not access skill. This is entry points. So I want to make sure that everybody that put access skills understand that this is an entry point student, and you should be able to tell that just by looking at the sample. Let me go back to the sample for you. As far as expressions and equations, 2 or 3 would be fine. I personally would give it a 2, but if you would give it a 3, I wouldn't argue with you. There's some wiggle room there. Knowledge and conventions, the majority of you said 2. I would agree. Text structure, again, the majority of you said 2. I agree. There shouldn't be any 4s with this. It is definitely not cohesive. It is, you can understand it, but you are not, it's not a 4. So a 2, I think it's a pretty good straight 2. But again, looking at it, you can take some time, look at it yourself, see what you would give it when you're not under the pressure here, under the gun. So thank you. But I do want to make sure that you're really very clear on the fact that this is entry point and not access skills. Okay. Let's move on. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because, as I said, Laura is going to go in depth. I'm just going to give you one example that this student is working at access skill level. So let's take a look at that measurable outcome. The measurable outcome says the student will activate a device within 15 seconds of the initial cue in an activity related to the creation of a written product. On that one we just did with Lacey, her work description label said that she completed an opinion writing sample about what being healthy meant to her. Okay, so do you see the difference here? She's going to activate a device within 15 seconds of the initial cue. Now, the brief description tells us that within 15 seconds of the initial cue, students activated a switch with pre-recorded sentences to compose a narrative on her winter vacation. Did she write the sentences? No. The sentences were pre-recorded. What was her job? Her access skill was to activate a switch during the creation of this narrative. So you can see here that she was 25% independent. She needed a lot of help. And I'm going to show you what her rubric would look like. This would be the level of complexity would be access skills. And then the demonstration of skills and concepts would be all one because the text is being provided by the teacher. So the only thing that you would have to add would be the independence and any kind of self-evaluation that you would want to add. Supporting documents is so important. It really does help us understand what the student is able to choose from. So if you have a student working on a dynamic display or a communication system of any kind, whether it's static or dynamic, it's helpful for us to see what those choices are. Now we know that the student on the left has many choices. They can go in, and once they pick coloring, that there's all different colors for them to choose from. And the one on the right looks like that's something that's already been opened, and it gives them a lot of opportunities to say what they want to say. Our students using devices need over 200 times a day to practice. That's a lot of practice. It isn't easy. It's difficult for them to learn how to choose what they want to say. And so the more opportunities they have to express themselves, obviously, the better. And if you can take a screenshot, and in this case, you see that the teacher took a screenshot and then wrote on it what was prompted and what was independent. So they both look like they're still in the early stages of using their device, but they are making choices. So please bear that in mind if you have a student using a device. Work with your SLP. I mean, hopefully you have someone that is helping you and helping you to add the right communication words, those temptations that get you to get the student to want to use the device and express themselves. So just to summarize here, there's no data chart required. You're going to include a work sample description label for each of those writing samples. And you're going to make sure that that final sample reflects only the communication done by the student. We know that you are all very smart. We don't want your writing. We want the student's communication. Samples for students at access skill level must include a final writing product. And again, Laura's going to talk about that. And I would highlight that if you are a teacher that's going to be doing access skills, you want to represent how the student participated in the creation of a sample, a final writing sample. This last one, I think we've nipped in the bud, but I just want to say it again. We're not going to score any samples that are bathroom related, anything done behind closed doors, not toothbrushing, showering, any kind of bathrooming routines. It's not going to be scored, and it won't be counted towards your minimum routine. Yes, I know it's important to many of our students. You can certainly work at it at school, but please don't put it into our assessment. And for those of you who have never seen this before, these are some pictures that a teacher gave to their student, and they captioned them. I just think they're very funny. The first one says, "The cat is not happy with her suit. The back of her tail looks like them things you dust with," which it really does. It's very funny. And the next one is, "Oh no, the lunch lady. The kids are going to eat me, and the students are so hungry. I am not like the other cafeteria food." And my all-time favorite, "It's when I first got potty trained. It didn't go as planned. I tried to hold myself up, and I just literally fell in." So that's one fun way to get your students engaged. Again, they could scribe. They could verbally tell you, and you could scribe for them. There's lots of opportunities for our students to express themselves and be engaged in conversations with you. So think about how you can do that. And just a reminder, we have science this afternoon if you didn't get to go to the science. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, and he's going to show you how to get into this writing piece and what that looks like.
Great. Thank you, Deb. Hello, everybody. So give me one moment. I'm just going to grab the screen share so we can get over and take a look at forms and graphs again, and I'll show you how to go about adding in the writing information. So one moment, please. Okay, so little bit of a disclaimer here. So I'll quickly show you again where you can get this, but I'm not going to walk through how to create an account, how to set up a student. We did all that if you joined us for one of the core concepts in the introduction series, where I walk you through everything you need to know about getting an account set up. So hopefully we'll get those recordings up soon. If for some reason you weren't able to make either session that we did for core concepts, just know that's where that lives. So we're going to kind of assume you have that knowledge at this point and move on and just show you the writing. But just in case you need, if you got there once, but you don't remember how you did it, you want to eventually make your way to the department's webpage, the resources, and kind of the easiest way to go about that is if you go to the materials page, which has been in the chat today, where you can find all the information about the fall trainings and other handouts that have been mentioned in the trainings as we go. Right in this manuals and resource guide, you'll see a link to the department's website, to the resources page. So if you click that, and then just scroll right to the bottom when it opens, that is where the link to Forms and Graphs lives, which will take you here. So again, good one to bookmark, just so you don't have to keep going around that loop if you forgot how you got in the first time. As I mentioned, we're just going to assume you at this point you have your account set up, and we're going to jump right in to a student. And remember, my account, a nice little feature of this is whatever I put in here, if it needs that information somewhere else, it'll do it for me. So just know this will all be blank by default the first time you come in. I'll come back to this little deleted student list in just a second as a nice little reminder, but we're going to just pop right into a student. We'll continue with what we used in core concepts the other day. We did a math strand from Michael Scott at grade 4 that we built out. Just know this is a grade 4, but they are all the same for writing. It doesn't matter 3 through high school. It is the same approach. It's just the grade changes around it, but same forms, same process, same things you need to do to complete a strand for ELA writing. So we'll hop in our student, and remember, if we needed to go back to our strand cover sheet, all that kind of high-level demographic information is here of who the student is, where they are. But what we are concerned with now from our table of contents are these 2 items again. So we have our skill survey and our strand cover sheet list. And remember, you want to do your skill survey first. If you try to create a strand and it sees that you have not completed your skill survey, it will not let you into that strand. So just make sure you complete the actual strand. And this catches people too. I helped with a ticket just yesterday for someone. Make sure that your skill survey that you create actually matches the strand that you're trying to create. So when we go into skill survey, I can create a new skill survey with this button in the red bar. It'll give you a new generic one. So just make sure you're picking the right one. We had, I can't remember which way it went, but they were basically creating a reading skill survey and then trying to create a writing strand. And it kept saying, you did not complete the skill survey. You did not complete the skill survey. They did a skill survey, but not the proper skill survey. So just make sure that you're matching up the right ELA writing with the ELA writing strand when you're doing a skill survey. So to create that skill survey, just select the one you want, select and continue, give a date. And then if you remember from previous sessions, it's about making a selection from 0A all the way up to almost always 100% in E. And the key to completing, to finishing, to unlocking a completed skill survey for the strand is every single line that you see. So for writing, you have nine choices you have to make from top to bottom. You have to make a selection for each of those choices. So as long as you have 9 clicks, 9 radio buttons selected, each line is represented. You can save this, and then you can go back to table of contents, but I like to just jump right into my strands list, which you can do with this button in the red bar, strands list, and it'll take you. And here's the one hanging out from the other day that we did in core concepts for number and operations fractions. So we're going to need to add a new strand. Go to cover sheet. We want English language arts. And we have different choices for the writing text types. They all work the same. It's just about the standards that are pulled in for them. It's one generic entry point for all. So that's even mostly the same, but the access skills can change a little bit, and I'll show you that. So that's why it's asking for what type of text type, because they do have specific learning standards attached to them, and then some filtered choice for access skills. So we'll just pick the first that we see. We'll go writing, opinion, argument. And so far, so good. It kind of looks just like what we saw the other day in doing a math strand. It's filling out the demographic information that it knows for the student, and then the content area and the strand we're in. And then we come across the learning standard. And again, these are filtered. So these are just opinion argument filtered from the list. You can find them all. Remember, if you click this resource guide, it will open up just the writing section of the resource guide. So lots of grades in this one. It's a 37 pages of it. So you just need to scroll to the grade and you can find those standards as written with their proper ID. But on the sheet, you're just selecting the learning standard. And Deb might have mentioned, don't get too hung up about the learning standard. They're linked to where you are. But as you'll see in a moment, the generic kind of entry point, if you're working on entry point, would pretty much align with anything you choose here. So don't forget, happened quick. I clicked that Get LS Text button and it attaches it in. So it's not saved to your strand cover sheet until you click that button. So remember, if you're not seeing the text, or if this is resetting when you leave this page and come back, just click this button after making the selection and it will attach the actual standard to your form. We'll skip over a level of complexity now, as we have done in the past, because it will fill that in for us if we use this button here. So when we get down to measurable outcome, again, it is just a text box. If you know the access skill or the generic entry point, you can just type it in. But highly recommend you click this button. It's the find entry points. Again, it says entry points, but also means access skills. What it will do is much more simplified in this case. Remember when we looked before, we had all of these tabs of grade spans at the top, sometimes from pre-K all the way up to high school. Just one tab across all grades, because entry point is just this generic. It's about using the mode of communication to express or create a writing sample. That's it. That's all you have to choose from. If you look at the full resource guide, there will be entry points in there. But they're more of a guide for you of some approaches or some activities that it might spur to how to create those writing samples, but only one entry point. That's by design. You're not meant to type those in as you see them. Just this is the only thing you need for entry point, and it's nice and general, and it covers a lot of what you're going to do in your approach in writing. But notice that they're more access skills. So those are specific skills. So you'll see release or give materials in relation to the written product. So they are much more of a specific task for an access skill instead of this one generic entry point. Said that, most of you will do entry points. So we'll click entry points and it will grab that, add on student's name, and notice previously we had XX accuracy and XX independence. And now it's just asking for independence to complete the rest of the measurable outcome. That's because the rubrics that you complete, that's what will generate the accuracy, if you will, the demonstration of skills and concepts component of the strand. So that will take care of itself by way of the rubric. So we're only asking in the measurable outcome for percentage independence, so give it a meaningful goal for the student, and that's completes the measurable outcome if you're doing entry points. Notice it new entry points, it says page NA, because technically that route, the communication, the create a writing sample, that's not in the actual resource guide, so it's you can't match it to a page. It's just this overriding generic entry point that you will use. So we do designate entry points, but obviously you're not going to find that word for word, so no page number. Here again, if you have a AAC system or some kind of device or modifications you're routinely using. This is just a text, so you can add a little bit of information and clarity to what you might have done with the student. That's just there for you to kind of use as a window into how all of this occurred. You don't have to, it's not a required element number 6. It's just there to allow you to describe kind of all these situations that you see up here in 6. And then when you look at the bottom, pretty simple. There's only 3 things. So we have no data charts. There is not a data chart requirement. You shouldn't be doing a data chart for writing as part of what you're submitting, like the other strands we looked at the other day in math and the other components of ELA for language and reading. Only work description labels and rubrics. That's all you have to do. Obviously, it makes sense to start with your baseline. And these two are almost identical in their function. It's just that one says baseline and one says final. So I'll show you that as we go, but just click on what you want to create. It will put in a placeholder for you. Go to evidence page. Again, this my description, you don't have to use it. I think it's particularly helpful in writing, and I'll show you kind of a completed sample in just a moment here, and you'll see why this might be helpful. But it's just there for breadcrumbs for you to know what that is, and I'll show you where that text goes. But you don't have to use it. It's just there for you to know a little insight of what the sample is when you're picking it from that chart list from the bottom of the strand cover sheet. And from here, we're just sort of filling in the blanks. We're going to give it a date. And then what was it asked to do? So in this baseline, what was the student doing? Describe what the student was asked to do in the creation of the baseline sample. So just a big text box. I won't sit here and make you watch me type, but you hopefully get the idea. So of all the samples you've seen that Dev has shown, it's just about that brief description. And then self-evaluation. Again, that was a little more heavily covered in the core concepts, but that's just the students' kind of reflection on how their work. You can describe how it was accomplished here, that student made choices in certain choices along the way of reflecting on their work. There is a popular option, and certainly not required, that there's a standalone self-eval sheet that the teachers use mostly for all the work that they're doing with the student, where they can choose how did you enjoy this activity? I liked it. I hated it. I never want to do it again. How difficult was it? Super easy. And they just make their choices after they've completed their work. And they just submit that with the rest of the strand. And they just say, see attached, to call attention that, I did self-eval somewhere else. And it's just a nice note to the reviewer when they're looking at this that, oh, okay, that they can kind of expect to see it somewhere else. So many different ways to do self-eval. We won't get into them all here, but just know that's the intent of that text box, is to describe how it happened or point us in the direction of where that is shown for self-evaluation. And that's it. There's really only a few things to fill out here, and then you're just attaching it to the sample, the writing sample that is the baseline for the student. Again, if you want to just print these, there is an option to sort of print them all at once, which I will show you when I show you the completed kind of mock-up I have. But anytime you see that printer friendly, you can click that and it'll open a new tab and strip away everything else and give you a version that you can print and attach right to the sample. So we are on the baseline. We can get back to everything else using strand cover sheet in the red bar, and it will take us right back. And notice that little "this is" breadcrumb I left myself. That's where it puts it, is in this my description. So if you have multiple stuff here, you can quickly tell them apart, because they're all going to be generically named either baseline, final, or rubric. So just there for you. And I'll quickly show you. We won't even really fill that out, because you'll see it is pretty much the same as what we just did, where we've got independence, description, self-eval, and date. The only difference is this one says final. So it's intended to be attached to a final work sample. So lather, rinse, repeat everything you just did on the baseline. Just know that that's the only difference, is the intent of where you're attaching this to. So we'll pop back and we'll show you the one other component, and it is that rubric. So again, no rubric for baseline. That's just the work sample and the description label to go on top of it. You don't have to do a rubric for the baseline. only your samples. You can put them in any order you want. I personally like to do it like this: baseline, final, and then add in the rubric. So I know that these two are, here's my final sample, and here's the rubric that's going with that sample. And to do the rubric, evidence page, again, just my description, it'll put that in there so you can tell them apart, give it a date. And then we can scroll down and we'll see the rubric. Not the only thing you have to do is just sort of hover over the area that you want. You'll notice it turns to a little hand indicating that I can click on it. And when I click, it'll turn this kind of purpley blue behind me, indicating that that's my selection. So you just want to go line by line. So we have level of complexity. We know we're at entry point, so I'm going to give it a 3. I will show you this, though. If you are doing access skills, if you are truly doing access skills, when you click 2, which indicates access skills, student address through writing access skills, it will do something, and that something is score everything for you. So it will, if you are truly at access skills, you should not be above a 1 in any of these. So it knows that. So it will just auto score those all in this. Independence obviously is student driven, so it won't infer what that is. You kind of have to tell it that. But if I put it back to entry points, then I can go about putting different scores in, but every time I click access skills, it's going to snap me into 1s, because that's really what's appropriate for access skills. You should never be selecting 2s, 3s, and 4s if you have done level of complexity 2. But we know we are at entry points, so I can click that, just hover over the appropriate the areas here for content, conventions, text structure, and vocab, which all these together are what make up that demonstration of skills and concepts. And that's where the accuracy score comes from, if you are curious. And then we have independence. This catches newbies a little bit, because you're just clicking all happy and fast up here. And then you get down here and you start clicking. You can't tell, maybe you can hear my mouse, but I am furiously clicking these, and they are not selecting. By design, you'll notice that these are all spans of percentages. 26 to 50% is a 2, and then 76 to 100 is a 4. But when these are scored, it's a calculated average across all your samples. So we need the actual percent so that we can do the math to get the blended average across the 3. So over here, you'll notice there's a drop-down button, and it's giving you, once you give it the actual percentage of independence, it will fill this in for you. So just know, to get independence, you got to do it over here. You'll get frustrated with the clicking of it just not turning. Just hopefully it spurs your memory. Oh yes, yep, I need the actual percentage, and you can give it in that drop down right over here. So that is and again, you could print the rubric just by itself, but I'll show you a better way as we move into kind of a mock-up of a completed sample. So that's it, though. That's the only really component that you need to do to writing. It's really straightforward as far as what the forms are. So we have the cover sheet, baseline and final work samples, and the rubric. And you just have to do 3 different samples, and with a work description and a rubric and 1 baseline, and that's it. I like to kind of show an example of what it might look like when you're complete. And so I'll go to my student list. Kind of a teachable moment, I suppose, for if you end up being in this case. If you remember, if you came to core concepts, I said if you accidentally delete a student, we don't really just delete it, we just sort of hide it from you. We just make it an inactive student. So remember, my account, if you scroll to the bottom where nobody ever goes, anything you've deleted, well, any student you've deleted in their work is just sitting here. So I've got one I've got called writing complete. I can restore. It'll come out of that list, and when I go back to my student list, ta-da, it's just sitting there for me as if it never happened. So if you accidentally delete, and people love to do it right before they're getting ready to submit everything, just know you can bring it back. You don't have to call anybody to help you. You can help yourself to restore everything. So I'm going to quickly hop in here, go to a strand cover sheet list. I've got another opinion writing, and notice this was grade 10. I kind of went quick, but you'll see, but it's exactly the same. I filled out my strand cover sheet with my measurable outcome, and then this is kind of what you would expect to see. So this represents what the requirement would be. I've got my work sample description, and then I've got a final description label with a rubric, final with a rubric, final with a rubric. And you see why maybe these are kind of more important in writing than some other strands. It just lets you know. So I know this one is my sample. So they were writing something about sticks, and then there's my sticks rubric to go with that. It just helps you know that you've got everything. And if you got to go back in and out, it's just really quick because they're all named work sample final. And then I did something about some playground stuff, and then a superstar sample that they wrote about. So it's all here. In my description, I think of all the places writing is, if you don't use it anywhere else, I think it has value in writing, as you can kind of see here. It just helps tell all this stuff apart. And then up here again, you'll notice instead of printer friendly, it says print options. So that's kind of my first clue that there's something different about this. So I can click it. Again, I can just do the strand cover sheet if I need to generate that again for some reason, but print multiple, and it'll stitch it all together for you. So it'll give you your strand cover sheet. It'll look back and give you your skill survey. And then I've got my baseline and my 3 finals. So these are my work description labels. And you might ask, well, where are the rubrics? Kind of like the data charts that we looked at. They look better. Again, it will shrink it to portrait. So the tall page, but they're really hard to jam in there. They look much better landscape. And again, that's a setting for your printer that you have to set. So all the stuff below here is perfect and aligned for portrait, but here it's going to want landscape, which it tells me about when I click this. Hey, these look better in landscape. So it's just an option to quickly switch that when you print it for these to give you a nice big rubric. But here they are, the 1, 2, and 3. And a word about the dates. Just make sure you match them up. The date of the work sample should match the date of the rubric. So if you're doing them all at once, they're nice aligned, but just know that both when you're stitching them together with the actual work and when you're typing in the dates, they're just numbers. They're easy to mess up, but just know that that's the intent. It's really helpful for you to put it all together, and it's helpful for the reviewers to know that this sample goes with that when the date aligns for everything. But that's it, and it's pretty straightforward, as I mentioned, for writing. It's as far as the program's concerned, there's not a whole lot of stuff. It's just about how you complete it and how you sort of group it together. So we'll leave you here, and Deb will kind of close it out, and then we'll kick it over to Laura, who will talk about writing for access skills.
Thank you, Kevin. So let's answer our questions. We only have about 12. I'm going to answer in person the baseline questions. Can the baseline writing sample be from a benchmark at the beginning of the year? You can, once you do your writing skill survey, you can do that benchmark anytime you want. Certainly you could do it today and have it ready. And then if you have a writing sample that you want to go with it, that's fine. But again, remember I said you can do different samples throughout the time that you have available. For the baseline, does it have to be without any support? No, you know your student. If you think they can, that's fine, but you don't want to frustrate them. See what they can do, and you're going to still document the independence for yourself so you can see how much help they needed and support throughout the that baseline. Okay, that is really for you. That's to inform you. So whatever works best for you and your student. I'm not going to take the time now to explain the difference between access skills and entry points. We had an entire session yesterday about access skills. I recommend that anybody that's still struggling with whether your student's an access skill or entry point to go in, and even though the recording isn't there, the PowerPoint for access skills is there, and I believe it would be very helpful, as well as looking at the educator's manual. So the text type for those captioned pictures, that would definitely be a narrative. Those were kind of fun, and I think kids get a kick out of something like that. Let's see. Leslie wants to know if there is a self-eval form. If you came to our introduction, or if you haven't come and you need to go back into the introduction, the core concepts, please go in there and look up the self-evaluation slide. And there's no form. You can create your own. There's some examples of what you could use, but there is no specific form to use. With writing, the nice part is they can choose the topic, they can choose who to work with, they can choose the form or the text type. So that's also a form of self-evaluation. Just looking through to make sure that all the answers, people are jumping in and answering questions. Interesting, Natasha, you asked about could the narrative be a play script? As long as the student is using expressive communication, I don't see any reason why not. If the student is helping to write the script, that'd be excellent. There's some programs out there, I think Hollywood, I'm not sure if that's the name of it, but where the students get to be the characters and then they write their own script. So sure, anything like that, as long as you can capture the accuracy and independence on it. Okay, I don't want to take time away from Laura, so we're gonna answer these questions behind the scenes, and we'll make sure your questions are answered before you leave here. If we don't get them answered right now, at the end of Laura's presentations, we'll stay for a few minutes and answer your questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and she's going to tell you all about ELA writing for access.
Hello all, I'm Laura, and I am here to talk to you about access for writing. There was a separate presentation yesterday about putting together an access skill portfolio. So if you have not seen that, you might want to be on the lookout when the recording of that becomes available in 10 days or 2 weeks, because that might answer some of the other questions you have. Because I noticed on the questions that people were asking from Deb's presentation that there's still a real confusion on the part of some people between what's the difference between access and entry. And I hope this presentation today will answer some of those questions. So when I was first asked to create a writing sample for my students who work at a pre-symbolic communication level, I was beyond frustrated. I failed to see what the purpose was of creating a written product for a student who not only couldn't write, but who at best had a barely emerging communication system. However, I have come to see that creating a tangible product or documenting my students' expressive communication responses in context in a permanently written product has allowed me to revisit communication exchanges over time and space. What do I mean when I say revisit communication across time and space? Well, typically, a communication exchange with my students is fleeting. They eye gaze or grasp an icon or activate a voice output device in the moment, and then the moment's gone. But consider this. At school, we've been practicing grasping tactile objects representing key ideas while listening to stories about the farm. And later, we brought those tactile objects when we went on a farm field trip. And when I offered my student the feather representing the hen or the piece of wool we used to identify the sheep and asked what he wanted to see, I noted his choice and his independence. And by capturing responses and writing them down, I have a permanent writing sample. And the writing sample could be as simple as this. Look at these student responses. You can see it's clear exactly how the student responded. And I'll talk about latency and independence in future slides. But by writing this down, the student and I would be able to revisit this conversation at a later time when we're back in a different space, school. So creating permanent writing samples regularly may provide you with lots of information about choices the student makes most often and maybe which switch sites are the most reliable. You'll pick up information about latency or optimal size, color, or placement of icons and tactile objects. And that's the big takeaway from this presentation. For the purpose of MCAS-Alt, writing is about building expressive communication. The writing strand is not about the motor skill of writing or tracing or keyboarding. But MCAS writing is all about communication. And I also want to clarify that many of the writing access points do include elements of movement. I mean, we have our students grasping or orienting materials or switch activation, but that movement is the integral component of the student's communication system. It's not about, their recording of the communication exchange. So as Deb said, think about getting help from your SLP, not your OT. I like to think about it this way. The writing strand is about creating a document that memorializes an expressive communication opportunity. Okay, how do you do that? So to get started in the Forms and Graphs program, always you have to complete the writing skills survey. And next, to find the writing measurable outcome, you select ELA content area and you consider one of the writing text types. So the different text types represent different expressive communication opportunities that we typically provide for our students. So for the opinion samples, they can document all the choice-making activities that happen throughout the day. For example, an opinion piece all about me and favorite things can be an opinion sample, and it can also serve as the student's portfolio introduction. Informative samples are about facts. So teachers might create templates to record student responses after teaching a lesson to capture what resonated with the student in the lesson. And remember, students working at an access skill level, those fill in the blank answers provided by the teacher would all be errorless because, again, the text is being provided by the teacher. But the independence score is what gets reported, and that reflects how independently the student addressed the writing measurable outcome that you selected, whether or not that was tracking or grasping or releasing or orienting the communication pictures or tactile objects in the expressive communication activity of filling in the blank. And then finally, a narrative text types are about personal experiences. So for example, considering having the student participate in writing that daily note home that you do at the end of the day. So if they were sitting beside you and you were writing, "Dear Mom, today I had," and the students presented with the tactile objects for OT and PT, and using his communication method, the student chooses what he wants to talk about first. On your permanent written product, you scribe what the student selected to complete the sentence. So then if you keep a copy for the portfolio and you send a copy with the objects home, that communication exchange can be repeated over space and time at home. So in the resource guide, you review those access skills found in the text types and purpose cluster. And what you do is you consider which one of these skills best align with the student's primary mode of communication. And because in the Forms and Graphs program at the access level, unlike at the entry level, you can select from these multiple access skills measurable outcome. Then you just document how the student demonstrates that skill in a baseline writing sample. And I think of that baseline as just, any early effort to capture students' expressive responses that you've identified in the selected measurable outcome in a communication exchange. So it's just the first time that you choose to just jot this all down. Well, then you record the student's ability to demonstrate that skill in 3 additional communication opportunities, including the independence. you attach a rubric and a work descriptor label for each of those 3 samples, and that's it. There's no data chart required. A baseline and 3 other documenting 3 other communication opportunities. So let's take a look at what this work descriptor label is all about. So work descriptor label, as Deb mentioned, it includes a description of what the student's asked to do, how the student participated and contributed to the final product. It describes the materials and the context of the activity. And note that all 3 work samples can either be the same text type or it can be a combo. And if you use a combo, I saw one of the questions that somebody asked in that from the last presentation, that would also necessitate that you would have 3 different cover sheets for writing, but that's fine. However you choose to do it is fine. So let's look at a sample of the work descriptor label. So as I mentioned, the work descriptor label gives additional context that's, sets up to explain the sample and what the person who's reviewing this is going to expect to see when they look at the sample. So this work descriptor label explains that the student responses available. This work descriptor label explains that the student's responses are going to, his choices are going to be presented in an auditory scanning format. And, in an auditory scanning format, 2 or more errorless choices are presented sequentially, and then they're repeated until the student indicates his response. So in this particular work descriptor label, it says, after watching the video clip, phrases to complete the music review were presented 2 at a time in an auditory scanning format in which the student activated his switch to make his choice. So what are we going to expect this sample to look like? Might look like this, as a matter of fact. So here's the sample, which records the choices that the student made. And this work sample could have also included the statements that the student didn't choose, if documenting that would be helpful information for you to capture, but it's not necessary. So you just want to indicate the choice that the student made, and that it indicates the P for prompting or the I for independent. And this indicates that in 3 or 4 of the questions, the student required prompting, meaning that he was 25% independent. Does that make sense? Well, let's look at the pre-scored final rubric here. So here's the rubric that went with the sample. And as Kevin said, that when you select an access skill, you're indicating that the student does not yet have a way to express him or herself independently without already having specific limited vocabulary provided by the teacher. So by definition, when you identify that the student is addressing an access skill in the Forms and Graphs program, the rubric's going to automatically pre-populate to a 1 score, showing that all of the text was provided by the teacher. And on the rubric, the only area the teacher needs to fill in is the independence percentage. And just a reminder, the writing sample, the work descriptor label, and the rubric all reflect the date that the writing sample was created. All right, let's look at another one. So here's an example of a narrative writing work descriptor label. So the measurable outcome tells how the student participates in creating this communication document. So this one says that Ralph will orient or manipulate material related to the creation of a written document. And again, that's a motor skill that he's manipulating the material, but these materials are his communication method. These are his words that he's using. These are the words that he's learning. These are the words that he's using in order to be express the ideas. So the brief description says the student's given the Mayor Johnson pictures related to the field trip to the shelter, and then this student is orienting the Mayor Johnson pictures to illustrate the story. There's also a space on this work descriptor label for self-evaluation, and I'll talk to that in just a minute. But let's look at the accompanying work sample. Is this what you'd expect to see from that work descriptor label? The student moved Mayor Johnson pictures used for his expressive communication to create this sample. So you can see that he was, the plus and the independence is recorded on each one of those pictures. And again, the teacher's recording the plus of how they address that measurable outcome. But remember that that overall accuracy score is not listed on the work descriptor label, because for the purposes of writing, the access score is determined by the rubric. So let's look at that rubric. So here's the pre-populated rubric with the independence noted. And again, because it's access, by definition, that means that the expression of ideas, the knowledge of conventions, the text structure, the vocabulary, all of that's provided by the teacher. In access writing samples, there's no original text provided by the student. The student's not creating that. The student participated in this activity by moving his communications icons that were presented to him by the teacher to express his personal experience. It's a level of complexity 1. The teacher fills in the independence rubric, which in this sample was 100%. Now, if you're interested more in scoring and how these scores are reported, you can read about that in the educator's manual on pages 42 to 53. All right, so let's look at this work descriptor label. Now, you should know that poetry is writing is included in the narrative text type. And poetry is often a great way for students who are working at access levels to participate in expressive communication and in writing samples, because poetry can be very sensory, and there's an emphasis on economy of words, which can sometimes be, ideal for our access kiddos. So the measurable outcome is that George is going to release materials related to the creation of a written product. Again, it's a motor skill, but the fact that these materials that he's releasing are the communication symbols, the communication materials he uses in expressive communication. So the description says that objects representing the fall were gathered on the playground to be used in the creation of a class poem on fall. So the classmates created each line written on poster board. So again, this is an original expressive communication activity. The student released the tactile object representing the line into the finish bin as the line was read within 15 seconds. So here's the sample. So this work sample notes the participation in releasing the communication objects as specified in his measurable outcome. Easy, right? And again, what does the rubric look like? Well, the pre-populated rubric scores generate the accuracy score, as I mentioned, and the teacher just needs to fill in the independence score. And again, for more information on how the skills are calculated and reported, it's pages 42 to 53 in the Ed manual. So really, let's just review. Here's the graphic. A lot of folks after Deb's presentation said, is that really it? 4 samples? And it's like, yeah, take a look. You need a skill survey, 1 baseline, work descriptor labels for 3 writing samples with 3 pre-populated rubrics. You must have those 3 pre-populated rubrics that match the samples, and that's it. For access or entry, it's the same submission requirements. So again, if you're unclear if your student's creating samples at entry or access level, consider if the student's using materials to participate in communication exchanges, but they're not expressing their original thoughts, that all those communication materials or words or choices available to them to use have already been selected from a limited array that was determined by the teacher. That's access. So finally, I told you I'd talk about thinking about self-evaluation. Well, self-evaluation is more than just, did I do a good job? Self-evaluation is about choice making. So choice making and evaluation of one's own work are essential components of the concept of self-determination, which is an important predictor of successful post-school outcomes. We do choice making with our kids all day. So this slide reminds me that self-evaluation is about choice making and encouraging students to have some kind of control in the activity if possible. What do I mean? Well, consider all the ways that students can make choices and note those choices in the space on the work descriptor label. Can they choose a topic you want to write about? Can they choose their communication partner? Can they choose their position? In the educator's manual on page 32, there's more descriptions about self-evaluation. But I think the important takeaway is there any way that the student can direct any kind of portion of this activity? This is another way to think about building expressive communication. So keep it authentic. And I'm frequently asked, what happens if the student doesn't make any choices or doesn't respond? And I can only say that different choice, that you just have to keep offering different choices and keep trying. And you just have to be on the lookout for new expressive communication opportunities. That's what this strand is all about for our kids at access skills level. So I want to just thank you, and I want to show you, here's Deb's email address and her contact information, and you can reach out to her with any questions, and if necessary, she can forward your information to me. And so if there's something that I can do to help. So as I said, I came into this, kind of kicking and screaming, but I did find that by documenting students' expressive communication activities, I was able to get some information that could inform my practice. So stay tuned, and we'll have science after lunch, and the teacher consultants will be helping to answer any of the questions that you might have now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I appreciate that. And I have no problem reaching out to Laura or to any of our teacher consultants with their expertise to get help on your questions. Also with our content people. I always feel like it takes a village, and it definitely takes a village for putting together these portfolios. So remember that, involve other people in this portfolio. I think we've kept up pretty well with the questions. There's a few questions left, and I know we have some time left. We were expecting to go until noon, so we can certainly answer your questions. A lot of people are still on. I just want to remind you, while there are a lot of people still on, that even though the recorded version is not going to be ready yet, including the access skills, what is there is the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint does have the information that's very helpful for you. We also have the educator's manual that can also answer a lot of your questions, the basic requirement questions. And we also have the introduction, which is broken down into 2 parts, and you can look through those PowerPoints. And if you want, you can just, scroll through till you find the area that you want. You can print out just that page. So don't be intimidated by any of those things or think, oh, I have to wait until the recorded version is up. No, it's all there for you now. And remember, if you've come to any of these trainings, I've told you, start early. The writing one, yes, you can do that over time, but you can do your baseline today or on Monday. And Halloween coming up, this is a great time to talk about different things that they're going to dress up if you have younger students, or it's a good time to look at some ways to get students to express themselves and talk about something engaging. So, well, I'm going to go off. I'm going to go mute. And if you have more questions, we'll be here for at least another 5-10 minutes to see if you have questions. And if not, hopefully we'll see you at the science if you need to come to that. And again, you have my email should you have more questions. Have a wonderful beginning to your school year if you don't have to come to science. So thank you for spending your morning with us, and talk to you all soon.